Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're calling in from today. We're thrilled to be hosting today's webinar, Why Skills-Based Learning is Not Enough, Building Capabilities for the Future of Work, with renowned global industry analyst Josh Bersin. My name's Ed Miller. I'm the CEO of NovoEd, and I'm your webinar host and moderator. I'm very excited to be with you and Josh today. Before we dive into the substance of today's webinar, I want to take a moment to review some housekeeping items. For those of you who are unfamiliar with GoToWebinar, please note that you are all on mute. You can use your control panel, as shown here, to submit questions at any time during this webinar. We'll be stopping throughout the presentation and have set aside time today at the end to address any questions we receive, so we encourage you to ask away. And at the end of this webinar, an exit survey will pop up. Please take a few moments to fill out the survey and provide us with some feedback so that we can continue to improve our webinar program. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded, so if you want to rewatch it or share with a colleague who was unable to attend, you'll be receiving the recording from us via email within 48 hours. With all that said, let's get started. For most of us on the webinar, Josh Bersin needs no introduction. Josh is an analyst, author, educator, and thought leader focusing on the global talent market and the challenges and trends impacting business workforces around the world. He studies the world of work, HR, and leadership practices, and the broad talent market. He is often cited as one of the leading HR and industry workplace analysts in the world. He founded Bersin & Associates in 2001 to provide research and advisory services focused on corporate learning. Over the next 10 years, he expanded the company's coverage to encompass HR, talent management, talent acquisition, and leadership, and became a recognized expert in the talent market. He sold the company to Deloitte in 2012 when it became known as Bersin by Deloitte. Most recently, Josh launched the Josh Bersin Academy, the world's first global development academy for HR and talent professionals at all levels and across all industries. He serves as the Academy's dean. His eminence as an analyst and thought leader has been globally recognized. His research on employee engagement, new models of performance management, and the ever-changing nature of HR and workplace technology is widely respected. He is often credited with the concept of high-impact corporate training, learning in the flow of work, and hundreds of articles on the evolution of people analytics and the use of AI in the workplace. Throughout his career in HR and HR technology, Josh has continued to focus on the needs of HR executives, HR teams, and the careers of HR professionals. He believes in the craft of human resources and is one of the profession's most vocal advocates for the importance of HR in the ever-changing world. And momentarily, you'll hear him talk about changes that are occurring in corporate learning. He'll discuss the importance of building capabilities rather than just skills, and how forward-thinking organizations are building capability academies within their learning and development environment. These academies go well beyond a library of content. It becomes a place people go to advance their job-related capabilities. This topic could not be more relevant to the very essence of what NovoEd provides. For those of you who may not be familiar with our company, NovoEd provides a comprehensive collaborative learning platform that's used to develop the high-value capabilities that are critical to the success of modern business. Our platform enables the creation, curation, and delivery of engaging learning experiences that build the capabilities that matter most to today's learner, enable business transformation, and improve organizational performance. Since our founding at Stanford 8 years ago at their social algorithms lab, millions of adult learners have developed their capability using NovoEd's platform. Our clients include many of the world's largest global corporations, prestigious universities delivering executive education, and some of the world's foremost training providers. As you'll hear, several of these companies, including Comcast and Cemex, have been pioneers in building capability academies. The NovoEd platform has been developed to enable learning experiences that engage learners and allow them to develop capabilities that are directly applicable to their work, and to do it at scale. NovoEd is centered around three critical elements of learning that can be difficult to implement online. Applied learning that allows learners to go beyond pure content consumption, but to practice and apply their learning in the context of real-world business issues. Peer and mentor support that enhances and reinforces learning through sharing experience and perspectives, and providing a way for peers to reflect on each other's work. And finally, group collaboration allows learners to practice and apply learning in small groups and teams. Our customers partner with NovoEd to build capabilities at scale that are strategically important to their success. They're looking to accelerate, pace, and expand the reach of critical skill development in a number of key areas, including leadership, digital transformation, and diversity and inclusion. And as organizations become flatter, more distributed, and more diverse, it's important that those capabilities support company values and enable collaboration and innovation. Momentarily, Josh will begin, but we're going to address a bit of technical challenge, so please stand by for about 30 seconds. And now, with no further ado, it is my sincere pleasure to introduce Josh Bersin.
Thank you, Ed, and welcome everybody. This is a very, very fascinating and important topic, and 1 hour will not really do it justice, but we'll do the best we can. And the crux of what I want to talk about for about 45 minutes is this idea of capability building and what it means relative to the technology and current state of training, and also relative to the word skills. And the word skills has become sort of a buzzword, and I'm going to try to demystify a little bit about what the word means versus the word capabilities. First of all, a little bit of motivation. The reason this is all so important is pretty clear to most of you, that the world of work is changing so fast that you can't define a skill, write it down on a job description, and expect somebody to have it and to use it and deliver it the way we used to, because everything is changing so fast. I won't read you the data on this chart, but it's pretty clear that every job, including the job of us in HR, has been going through change, and the original idea of creating a skills model or a competency model associated with the job doesn't keep up anymore. So we need a way to do things in a more sort of a dynamic way. We also have discovered that one of the indications to me, or maybe symptoms of the fact that this is going on, is productivity. Even though we've had 12 years of GDP growth, and you could argue whether the GDP growth has been consistent or inconsistent, and I think you could probably argue that it has not been consistent, but the overall GDP is growing. The productivity of individuals and companies has not been growing at nearly the rate. In fact, it's almost 1 to 1.5% versus 2.5 to 3% and higher of GDP, because we are not able as human beings to keep up with the rate of change of technology. Now, there's many reasons for productivity data like this. Some people think it's skills, some people think it's employee organizations and employee engagement, employee experience. You could also argue it's commute time. It turns out that if you look at the data in the United States, commute times have gone up by 24 minutes over the last 2 years, and that's a lot of time to be spending in the car, on the bus, when we could be spending at work. But just to motivate you, one of the things that's going on that I think is maybe come under the covers that you need to be aware of is that because of the nature of the economy and because of the nature of sort of our demographics, the size of the workforce is not growing. In fact, the fertility rate in the United States and the UK and Germany and Japan and a lot of the Northern European countries is well below replacement. And given that, you know, immigration is not as easy as it was maybe a few years ago, most companies are struggling to find people. And with an unemployment rate of, you know, 3 to 3.5%, if you're not reskilling and internally moving people and creating productivity inside the company, you can't hire your way into growth. And that's what this data is showing. The conference board essentially has found that the only way GDP will continue to grow is through what is called quality of labor. And part of that is also the fact that we don't have full-time employees running in our companies anymore. I mean, I just did a big study on this and found that, you know, it's very common to find that in many large companies, 20, 25, 30% of the actual workforce is not a full-time employee, may not be located in the learning management system or even the HR system. And these are people that have very highly developed skills in some areas, but not in other areas. So that's part of the work environment too. On the employee side, we have another interesting thing going on, and that is that employees are telling us that they're getting anxious. And it's funny, if you look at all of the research that's coming out on the employee experience and employee retention and employee engagement and you know, what can we do to improve the voice of the employee, the word that comes out the most is anxiety. And it's not anxiety about families and health, although it may be. It tends to be anxiety about your job. You know, am I keeping up? Am I spending too much time in meetings? Am I working on the right projects? Do I understand how to manage my time well? And what you'll see as I talk a little bit about skills is that there's a new set of skills that we all need to learn in this new world of work that will directly impact that. Now, on the word skills, I don't know what the technical definition of skills is if you looked it up in the dictionary, but most of the data you see as a learning professional or an HR professional deals with some of the things on the right here. Technical skills, you know, Java, software development, analytics, tools, systems, products that you have to know how to use. And if you believe a lot of the research you read in press releases and some of the information that comes out from LinkedIn and other companies, you would sort of come to the conclusion that the skills of the future are all technical. But actually, when you get under the covers, you find something quite different. While there are some very acute needs for very technical skills, machine learning right now, data science used to be number one, now it's number two. If you look at the skills in demand from LinkedIn, and this is I think it's 2018 data, it says 2017, but it's actually, the chart's mislabeled. While the most in-demand skills are in the technical area, the overall aggregate skills are in soft skills, or what I call power skills. Interestingly enough, LinkedIn and some other many other companies aggregate this data, found that the most in-demand work city in the United States in 2019 was the San Francisco Bay Area, where I happen to live, and actually where the folks at NovoEd are too. But the most in-demand skill in the San Francisco Bay Area is not machine learning. It's oral communications. Because what the world has now discovered is that the real skills we need to perform well in a highly digital company where we're working in teams and things are changing very quickly are behavioral skills. And I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I just want to point it out. Why products like NovoEd are becoming so important is that the skills that are needed today, this is data from IBM, and they surveyed, I think it was around 4,000 business leaders, not HR people, about what were the things they needed in their workforce. And you can see flexibility, agility, adaptability, time management, ability to work in a team, ability to communicate effectively. You're not going to learn that through a 1-hour video in a video platform that shows you how to use a piece of software. Those are things you're going to learn through a much more complex process. Now, we also know historically that this is true. If you look at wage growth by family of job, the families of jobs that have continued to grow relative to inflation in blue are those that are what are called high social, high math. In other words, technical and soft skills related. The jobs that are purely technical in green have really, the wages in those jobs fall with inflation. I know this because I was an engineer. I studied engineering in school. You have to develop this broad capability, set of capabilities to succeed and continuously succeed. And the other interesting element of this is that by age, young people feel this even stronger than older people. You know, I've been in the workforce for, more than 40 years, but this data shows that millennials and Gen Z workers feel this even more, are even more interested in learning these emotional skills, the gray bar, than older people, because they understand that while they may come to work with deep technical skills that they learned in high school and college, as soon as they get into the workplace and they see what they actually have to do, the jobs are much more complex. So whether we call it reskilling or capability development, it's going on all the time. It's going on in your current job as you stay current and upskill. It's going on in the performance improvement as you reskill to become better at your job. And it's going on when you change jobs and get promoted or move to a new role in what I call reinvention. And all three of these things are going on all the time in every single company. Now, the other reason capabilities are so important, and I'll just touch on this before I get into learning, is that the way we work and the way organizations operate has changed. A lot of you have probably seen this chart before, but let me just basically touch on it. What it's really showing you is that the talent models on the left, which were really the original talent models in most of the books written in HR, were really designed to optimize careers around the hierarchy. In a hierarchy, you become successful by optimizing your success within a functional area, and then by moving up the chain into higher level jobs in that functional area. But in a company that operates as a network with lots of projects and things starting all the time and new initiatives, your success in your career is really developed through your own reputation and the capabilities that you have and that other people know you have, and then your ability to share those capabilities with others in the context of one project or one team or multiple teams. And that's really a very, very different way of operating. Many companies call this agile. Agile is a technical term that was developed in software engineering. And, the practices of agile are now widely used. I was just at an interesting meeting right around the end of the year down in Australia, and I met with a bunch of banks and insurance companies, and every single one of them told me they're operating in agile. And what they're really telling me, they don't necessarily use this precise agile methodology of a software company, but people work in squads. They share their skills between teams. They have goals that are constantly being updated, and they expect their careers to operate that well as well. So the older career models, where we could basically plot in a triangle, what your career was going to look like, and we could create career capability and skills assessments as you moved up the pyramid, have really changed. They look much more like this, where if you still think about your company as a pyramid, and most companies are pretty much like a pyramid, you're really moving in many different directions at many times. And so your capabilities and your broader capabilities as an individual and your ability to assess and develop these capabilities are continuously in demand. And we'll talk about what that means relative to a capability academy in a couple minutes. The other thing that's changed, and the reason capability academies are so important, is that in the old model of talent and the old model of HR, your manager was responsible for your career. And I know this when I was a young engineer, worked at Exxon. I really put my career into the hands of my manager, and I expected him to help me and to know what I should be doing year by year, month by month, to make sure I was moving ahead for the opportunities that I had in that particular company. That has really changed. First of all, most of us have multiple managers. We might have a career manager, and then we will have project managers and project leaders who are leading different projects we're working on. Most managers don't know everything that's going on in the company. Very few do, so they don't know what all the opportunities are. They themselves are responsible for multiple projects. It's unusual to find managers that only manage people. Most managers have projects of their own and activities that they're involved in that are not involved in managing people. And then your demands and needs and expectations for your career are quite multifaceted, and they involve things that your manager may not know. If you really think about the way careers work today, people might want to work on developmental assignments to become more technically skilled. They might want to take a job rotation in another country or another city. They might want to work for another person because they admire that person, or they might have some very particular personal demands in the green circle, that have to do with their aspirations and their purpose and meaning at work that they want to meet at work. And those might be projects or activities that are not necessarily aware that your manager may not know. So the world of capability development today really looks like this. Now, this picture, it's funny, this is actually a very old picture. This picture came from a client I met many years ago. And in the very center of this picture is this thing called the Individual Development Plan. And for those of you that have been in HR for a while, you know that for many, many years, we used to sit down and write these things on paper, and they were usually as part of the performance appraisal, and everybody had one. Well, that's all very true and very good, but today the Individual Development Plan has to be happening in almost real time. We're always looking for opportunities to grow. We're always looking for opportunities to develop. We're always looking for opportunities to, learn from our mistakes. And that is really what's going on in capability development today. Okay. Now, one of the things that gets in the way of this, and I'm going to talk about learning now, is that we're also busy. It's interesting, 12 years into this economic cycle, companies are making a lot of money. I don't think I've ever seen a profit like Q4 of last year. The profits that companies have been reporting are really sort of almost obscene. The tax rates have been lowered in the United States, yet individuals are feeling more pressure and less time and less mindfulness than ever before. And we're not going to be able to stop that. But we have to think about learning as a safe and calming place to go to get away from the noise. Now, part of that is creating an employee experience that enables learning. And I'm not going to talk about employee experience. That's another 2-hour webinar in itself. But you need to look around inside of your company and figure out where people are wasting their time. Because what you will find in the area of learning, in the area of capability development, that you have to put time into this. So let me go through this for a second, because this is a really important piece of information here. A year and a half ago, I did a big survey with LinkedIn, and we asked more than 2,000 people, about their learning behaviors and how much time they spend learning and how they learn and what impact it seems to be having. And what you can see on the left is that there's a small number of people, about 7% of the workforce, that believe they are spending as much as 5 hours or more per week learning. And so, I don't know who these people are, but, they're people that take time at night, on weekends, during the day, to read, to listen to other people, to go out to lunch with somebody, to read a book, to take a course, go into the NovoEd Academy, finish the courses that they have, and get done with it. Turns out those people in that small light blue slice are, as you can see, the high performers in these companies. They are 47% less likely to be stressed. They are 48% more likely to have found purpose. They are 74% more likely to know where they want to go with their career. I don't need to read this to you, but these are the happiest, most productive people in your company. So they're spending 5 hours a week, which is, it's what is that? 10%, 8% of the time they're at work learning. So we've got to find time and a way to give people productive, high-performing learning experiences and give them the time to do it. It turns out that there's an aspiration for this. When you ask people why they would leave a company, the reason in most cases they leave, if you do an exit interview, this comes through in all the research on exit interviews, is it's usually because they weren't growing. they weren't finding the next thing. They didn't feel like they were moving ahead. So that's what's going on. So now let's talk about how we deal with these issues. So there's really two issues in capability academies. The first is framing up what it is, and the second is delivering it. So let me talk a little bit about the tech area. The learning tech market is incredibly complicated. NovoEd is an incredibly successful, fast-growing company in this space, and poor Ed and his team are going into you guys' accounts all the time, and you're asking him, you know, what about this and what about that? There's a lot of tools. The average L&D department has 23 different technologies, and they fall into all these categories. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with all these categories, but I will say that what's interesting, what's happened, is that we used to think that the LMS was the central platform of learning in a company. And that was about 15 years ago. Since then, things have changed. People can't really learn on an LMS. The learning management system, the LMS, was designed as a management system. That's what the M stands for. And so since then, there's been this explosion of learning experience platforms, what I call program delivery platforms, and micro-learning platforms. Now, if you really look at where the market's growing, the reason we have all these platforms is that most learning experiences at work are a combination of what I call micro-learning and macro-learning. Micro-learning means, you know, I can't figure out how to use GoToWebinar, with like we were just going through this 5 minutes ago. So I need to know where to click. Maybe there's a 2-minute video that'll teach me how to turn this thing on. Macro-learning is, you know what, I've never given a webinar and I don't really know how to present this material, so I need help structuring it, I need help framing it, I need help deciding how to communicate it, and that's going to take more time. In fact, that might even take a series of activities, some talking to other people, some project work that I do and get feedback on, and the use of an instructor or a leader or a coach to help me. And so the learning technology space has adopted so that this whole top blue area is becoming one big area. Now, the way to think about it in terms of learning in the flow of work is that in the flow of work, people go through a learning cycle. You have periods of time when you're on a very steep learning curve. You have periods of time up here where you're plateauing. You have periods of time down here where you're maybe not learning at all. And we need people to continuously reinvent themselves and grow at various points in this cycle. If you don't provide opportunities to continuously grow and you end up on the red bar, people will become disengaged, they'll leave, they'll make mistakes, they'll look for another job, and we don't want to have that happen. So what we're really trying to do in the world of learning technology today is fill in this chart for every employee everywhere in the company. And it's an easy picture to draw. It was a little bit complicated to create this PowerPoint, but it's a little bit harder to do. And that's why platforms like NovoEd are so important, because there are a significant number of times in the learning experience at work where you need to step aside and really learn something significant. And if you do that, by the way, this is sort of a funny chart, but I just want to point it out. What you really do is you don't just learn in the flow of work, you reach what this professor would call ecstasy. The word flow really means doing work that is meant for you. And so if we can figure out how to mix micro-learning and macro-learning and all the different forms of content at work in the right blend, we will create flow. It turns out, if you look at real-world experiences in the technical community, and this is data that comes from O'Reilly Learning, which is a company that sells technical education, as you become more advanced in a topic, you need less structured learning and more unstructured learning. But everybody is going through a cycle where we're a novice in some things and we're an expert in other things, so we always need both. We also know, as Ed just mentioned a few minutes ago, that you don't learn by reading, you don't learn by watching a video. I mean, you can learn to some degree, but you really don't retain things until you use them. And so what the learning scientists have discovered is that there are two critical pieces to building capabilities. First is repetition, revisiting content on a regular basis with space between the time. In other words, take learning something new and coming back to it 2 days later and forcing your brain to go back and recollect that data and stimulate the neurons that were stimulated 2 days ago to bring it back again. That's how you create learning pathways. And the second is to practice and use it. What this is showing you that in some of the most demanding learning environments, this is actually education in medical school where you learn anatomy, which is extremely complex, that the highest retention took place not just through repetition, not just through conceptual mapping, but through practice and retrieval, using the content, being asked to recollect it, doing a project, collaboration. And that's really about capabilities. And by the way, just to touch on this, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. In L&D, you have to become experts on this. If you look at the roles of L&D and what we're now learning that you need to do and we need to do as learning designers, and I'm part of this too because I'm actually running Academy also, you need to be comfortable with these topics, comfortable with learning experience design, comfortable with building learning communities, comfortable with content curation, and comfortable with thinking about a capability model, not just a set of skills. So what does this all mean relative to the Capability Academy? Well, it's been interesting to me. I've been in the space since the early 2000s, really late 1990s, and I remember quite well one of the first projects I ever did. I was a contractor for Saba, and we were working on Saba's competency modeling, and this was in 1998. So that was, I don't know, 22 years ago or something. So what we would do, and you guys have a lot of these systems, that we would say, okay, competency so-and-so is part of a bigger competence. So we'll build a competency family. We'll have 5 levels of capability within each competency, and we'll create this all model, and we'll end up with maybe a few thousand of these things, and then we'll come up with a bunch of assessments, and then we'll roll this out. And what we basically found was that those projects take years, and by the time you finish them, it's not clear how useful they are, and by the time you finish them, the world keeps changing. And so we came up with this idea of the word skills. Now, I don't know who started using the word skills, but the word skills became a buzzword. So everybody talked about reskilling and upskilling and new skilling and on and on and on. Let me just throw something out there for you to consider. They're not the same thing. If I know how to use Excel and I know how to build a pivot table, that does not mean I'm a financial analyst. In fact, it is a skill that I do need in order that will contribute to me being a financial analyst. But there's a whole bunch of other skills that I need to become a financial analyst. Becoming a great financial analyst is a set of capabilities that I can demonstrate on the job in a real world situation where somebody says, hey, we're losing money, go figure out why. That I may or may not build a pivot table to do that. And so, the reality of the world of work is that both of these things are happening all the time. And we have to give people skills and higher level capabilities. Now, as I've been thinking about this and trying to frame it up, and this is something that basically occurred to me through my work actually with NovoEd over the last 6 months, I realized one of the ways to conceptualize this is not we're going to have a bunch of skills and a bunch of courses and a gigantic library of stuff and you can go in and click around and take whatever you want. I mean, you can do that. You can buy a learning experience platform. You can throw out all sorts of content. You can buy LinkedIn Learning. You can buy Skillsoft. You can buy this and that. And people will click on those things and they will use them. But what you find is that the actual learning is not as much as you think. And the reason for that is that ultimately what business people want is they want capabilities. They want your salespeople to sell more. They want your manufacturing engineers to improve safety. They want your supply chain managers to reduce the time and improve the productivity and cost effectiveness of your supply chain. They don't care about the detailed skills. They want the outcomes. So one way to think about that is to think about the problem as an academy. Now, I personally went through this when I was building our academy, and what occurred to me is it's an interesting word. And if you think about a police academy, those of you that have been to a sales academy, a lot of companies have sales academies, leadership academies. Academy is not a library of content. It is a place. It is a place you go to learn, to study, to share, to contribute, to advance the state of thinking. And I think if it's turning out to be a good word. And I think if you think about your problem as a small number of academies made up of all sorts of learning activities and experiences and content, you'll be better off. And that's kind of where this is going. Now, one of the most interesting things that's happened while I've been trying to go through this as an analyst is this wonderful book came out. Now, David Epstein is a researcher, and actually he was just on Fareed Zakaria last weekend, and I have the video, and you should probably watch it. It's about a 5-minute video. But what he discovered in this book, and I really, really love this book, and I think anybody in L&D ought to read it, is that if you look at the highest performing people in sports, business, entertainment, politics, other parts of life, they learn their craft very slowly. And they are actually very broad. They're not just deep. There's this idea of the T-shaped learning curve, the T-shaped career, and I didn't put the chart in here. But what we're finding is that in a world of highly specialized technology and machines, depth is important, but breadth is even more important. And in fact, in the work we're doing in HR development, we're having a lot of conversations with companies about what we call deep, broad skills. In other words, becoming broad in a deep way. And what he also found is that people that are very, very good at their jobs, the reason they're good at them is that they're really good at pattern matching. They're really good at context. They don't just learn, you know, if you go back to the very beginning when I showed you that chart from IBM about time management, do you remember we used to go to time management courses and they used to teach you how to fill out these little books and how to schedule a calendar and stuff? Time management has nothing to do with that. Time management is not managing your calendar. Time management is knowing when to not waste your time on something and where to spend your, it's a context problem. It's a problem of perspective. And one of the things they also found is that the people that become the highest performing people at work in their careers don't study one thing all the time. They don't, you know, shoot free throws from the free throw line all the time. They shoot baskets from all over the court in all sorts of different conditions. And that's what deep capabilities are about. And that's what Academy is all about. Now, how do you do that? You know, everybody's all gaga about online learning and videos and, you know, doing things online. That's part of it. But it's really, you know, a combination of 4 things. And I've studied this for years, and, you know, there's many ways of framing it. And I think Ed's model a little bit earlier was a little bit different, but it's the same idea. There's on-demand learning. There's, you know, programmatic learning, where you actually go through a program, and at the end of the program, you reach a learning state that you were not in before, and the program has multifacets. There's group learning, collaborative learning, team-based learning. We call it cohort-based learning in our academy. And then there's on-the-job learning, where you actually go back to work, you try something, and somebody says, hey, that was good, but you know, this happened, so maybe you should do it that way instead of this way. All of those things are part of your academy. And what I would suggest to you in your learning journey, in your company, in your role, your career in HR, is that you need to move yourself into thinking about those academies. Now, the learning industry has been through a lot. It's a very dynamic place, going through a lot of you know, change. And what's happened is, I think we are going through a shift. We had the LMS blended learning world of the early 2000s. Then we had the world of the LXP, where everybody said, oh, all I need to do is give everybody a Google-like YouTube experience, and then they'll learn everything they need to know online. And what we're finding is, while that's good and it does satisfy latent demand for information, we need to move it to the next level. And that is what I call a capability academy. And I showed you some examples here. And the reason I came up with this idea of this word is that I was actually interviewing a bunch of companies that were using NovoEd, including Comcast and Cemex and some of the people that you're going to hear about in a minute. And they basically said to me, look, the CEO really doesn't care if people know analytics, but they really care if they know customer service. They really care if they know sales. They really care if our supply chain is healthy. They really care if we're safe. Those are capabilities that the CEO cares about. And so you as an L&D professional need to figure out which of those capabilities are the most important and how do you build a complete academy about them. You don't need an academy on every single topic, but there are academies, all of which have all of the things in that blue box in the areas that are most important to you. How do you figure out where to build an academy? It depends. I mean, there are some very common problems that companies have that demand the need for an academy. Leadership academies are very common. Most of you have leadership development, and most of you have learned that leadership development is not a course. It's an ongoing set of activities and knowledge sharing and external information and models and exercises and developmental experiences for leaders. Usually in sales, as the blue bar shows. This is a way of thinking about where you want to have academies. You want to build academies in areas of your company where the curve is very steep, the ROI is very high, and you want to, and this will not turn out to be 50 things. I mean, it would turn out to be 5 things. It might turn out to be 10 things. So anyway, we could talk more about how you build, how you decide what academies to build, and maybe in the next into Q&A. So let me talk a little bit about, sort of an example. So there's many examples of this, and I'm going to turn it back over to Ed in a minute, and he's going to talk to you about some of the things, that have been going on at NovoEd. But the one that I thought was most interesting is at Cemex. Cemex is, for those of you who don't know the company, one of the most successful companies in the world. I think they are the world's leader in cement and aggregate and all those building materials that companies use all over the world to build buildings and bridges and roads and all sorts of things. And the head of learning in that group, in that company, had, as everybody does, all sorts of learning technology and content, and they were looking at buying an LXP, and they went to their business leaders and their CEO and they said, okay, look at all the stuff we're doing. And the feedback they got was, you know what, some of that stuff is great. I'm not sure I care so much about it. Here are the things that really matter to me. Safety. We have not had an occupational fatality for years. We don't want to have one. We are known for safety. We need and I want you to make sure we maintain our focus on safety in every part of the company, every industry, every geography that we do business in. Second was supply chain. We are in the business of moving large amounts of material from place to place. The material comes from different sources. Our ability to be the company we are is dependent on the strength of our supply chain. Everybody needs to know what the supply chain is, how the supply chain works, what their role is in the supply chain, and how they can make the supply chain better. And so they basically found that, and then there was obviously an academy about digital skills, but it turned out the digital academy was not as strategic as they thought. It wasn't as much in demand as they thought. And so they went to NovoEd, and they found NovoEd because NovoEd is a complete learning system that can handle all the different aspects of an academy. And they built an academy in safety and in supply chain. And what the head of that academy told me was that as we started to build this, we realized this wasn't even an L&D thing. This was a business thing, and we needed a business leader to own this academy. So one of the sort of best practices of the Capability Academy is that the owner of the Capability Academy is the business owner of some part of the company that has to sponsor that continuous level of understanding. At Capital One, where they went through a massive digital re-engineering and reinvention about AI and security and cyber and all the things they needed to do to become a very, very digital financial services company, the head of the Digital Academy is actually, I think he's the head of IT. I think he's the CIO. I don't remember. But he's somebody in the business. It's not somebody in L&D. So what you get to do by building academies is enlist the support and the senior executive sponsorship of business leaders to help you do this. Most of you have sales academies. That's one I would argue almost every company can benefit from. At Comcast, they have a customer service academy. I happen to be a Comcast customer. I know Comcast pretty well as a customer. Comcast has a rather unbelievable customer service experience. I don't know how they do it, but anything that goes wrong with your TV or internet service in Comcast is instrumented and supported and repaired, and there's updates and fixes, and there's people involved. I don't know who does all this stuff behind the scenes, but I did talk to the guys running this. They built an entire academy about that, and the academy is constantly building new content and developing new programs and teaching people things they need to know in new domains and new topics to do that. That's what I'm getting at. Now, the final thing I want to talk about before we open up for questions, I'll turn it back over to Ed, is the role of culture. You will not be able to develop an academy and really make it stick unless you have a culture. In other words, it might be rather appealing to say, oh, we have this LinkedIn Learning library, let's just brand it our digital academy and then we'll have an academy. That actually doesn't work. It might be a good marketing idea, but ultimately the way the organization will thrive is the things under the surface of the iceberg here. I won't read these things to you, you can read them yourselves, but will people be able to spend time on the academy? Will they be able to leave their job for a day or a half a day or 2 days to go to a workshop and meet with other people? Will you be rewarded for teaching other people in the company? Will you be penalized for not admitting that you don't know something when you go to the academy? I mean, there's a lot of social and cultural issues on the academy concept. I worked for IBM in the 1980s when IBM was the king of the tech market. And I was there for 10 years, and I probably spent 3 to 4 weeks a year, entire weeks in education, dedicated to learning new technologies, new software, new things in the sales organization, personal skills that I needed to have at IBM. IBM was more than willing to spend their money and time on training me to do that. And that helped IBM become, at the time, one of the most iconic, successful companies in the tech industry. And I think IBM has gone back and doing that again now with their entire focus on end-to-end reskilling and all the capabilities that you can develop inside of IBM. So anyway, this is part of your job in the academy too. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there. And just to let you know a little bit about me, Ed gave you kind of a little bit of a long introduction, and I don't want to go back over that. I can speak to this because I'm building an academy myself. We actually are experiencing this personally in the academy we're building for HR. So I'd be happy to answer any more questions on this. Okay, so that's a little bit about it. I think what we're going to do, because we want to have some time for questions, is I'm going to stop there. There's been a lot of content, and turn it back over to Ed and give you a chance to ask me some questions, and let's see what's on your mind. I think this is a really important evolution for you to think about in your company. And as the year progresses and we look at even more reskilling opportunities in companies, I think it'll become a paradigm that will really, really work for you. Thank you for Ed for bringing me on board here to do this.
Thanks, Josh. We do have some questions. One I see is about how to measure capabilities and what your thoughts on are the metrics around that. So we can start with that one, and then also a little bit more about effective delivery methods for capability development. But let's talk about how we measure this. Sure.
Well, if you look at there's a series of different ways to measure things. I wrote a book on this called the Training Measurement Book. One is the utilization. If you have an academy and nobody comes, it's definitely not working. I'll give you a funny story on this. When I was at Deloitte, one of the people I worked with at Deloitte is a guy named Bill Pelster, who is actually working with me now, and he was responsible for development for what's now called Deloitte University, but it was originally called the Deloitte Leadership Academy. And there was a lot of effort in Deloitte to determine whether they should build I think it was a $300 million facility in Texas for people to go and teach each other and learn and collaborate. A lot of people didn't think it was worth the money, but they did it anyway. The CEO at the time really wanted to do it. They built it. It is now so full and so busy and so oversubscribed that I believe, the last I heard, it takes months to get in. That's a measure of success. People vote with their time. So that's number one. Number two is results. One of the things you can do with an academy and a business sponsor is you can define the business metrics in the company that will correlate with the academy's success. If you're building a sales academy, the person who owns and sponsors the sales academy probably knows what the sales numbers are. And so you could measure the success of the academy through its direct impact on contribution by looking at people that have been through the academy, reached different levels of achievement in the academy, and their results in sales. And because the benefit of an academy is not something owned by L&D, it's something owned by the business. And so if it isn't pushing the needle forward on the business side, it's not working. The third is, your level of professional growth of the people in the academy. One of the things you'll find as you do this is that there's a never-ending need to credentialize people's skills in an academy. I might go to a sales academy in my first 2 years on the job, and I'm pretty good, but then my third and fourth year, I'm stalled, and I need to go back to the academy and learn how to become a large account manager. And then, in my 10th year in sales, I may need to go back to the academy and learn how to become a sales executive. And then in my 15th year in the academy, I may need to go back to learn how to become the sales district manager, the district leader. And so, like a police academy, you can measure its success by the progression of people up the levels as you build capability models to different levels. So all of those important. And then the fourth area is just net promoter. Just ask people, would you recommend this academy program to your peers? And I always found when I studied learning measurement years ago that was one of the most powerful measurements you had. If they're not recommending it to other people, then you need to do something to make it a little bit better. So all of those are valid ways to measure this.
Thanks, Josh. Another one, which was a prompt we were going to chat about, but someone wanted to know, tied together, how does human resources, how might they host cohorts to make employees more engaged and willing to contribute within the cohorts? And second, that is the value of the cohort learning itself relative to this new organization you described, where building relationships to get things accomplished in that less structured hierarchical organization, how learning can help. So a two-part question: how does HR help facilitate the cohorts? And then what is the value of this cohort-based learning when it comes to building this unofficial network?
Great. Well, this is something that NovoEd as a company knows a lot about. It's a fascinating topic, and I have learned a lot about it in the last year. Groups of people of a similar mind learn a lot from each other. And so the magic of an academy, the magic of cohort-based learning or collaborative learning, is setting the context and creating an environment through a series of questions so people will learn from each other. And you all know this because it sometimes happens in school. Sometimes in school you're sitting there bored to death, kind of waiting for lunchtime. But sometimes in school, the instructor breaks you into groups and you start working on a project, and within a half an hour, there's so much activity going on, you're learning things from each other that you never would have learned in the simple pedagogical model. And so cohort-based learning is incredibly powerful. What we can do and what you can do in HR is, first of all, you have to create a cohort model where you have the right number of people coming together. We found in our cohorts in the JBA and in the one that I do is that the right size cohort is somewhere between 40 and 50 people. But that's because of the type of learning that we do. If it's a hands-on program on how to, use a machine, it might be a cohort of 3 people or 4 people. If it's a course or a program on data analytics, where lots of people are giving examples, it might be 60 or 70 people, but it's in that ballpark. It's not 2 people and it's not 1,000 people. If you have too many people in the cohort, it's a big discussion group and nobody feels like they know anybody. If it's too small, there's not enough activity. The second thing that's important is the instructional design. You have to design the program around the cohort so that there's enough basic knowledge shared and there's enough of a stimulation or a stimulus to start the conversation in the right direction. And that's what teachers do. I mean, this is what good teachers do. I was at a course, I taught a course with UC Berkeley a couple of months ago and managed to observe some very, incredibly successful faculty take a room of 50 CHROs and start asking questions that created an incredibly dynamic conversation on some topics that I was actually not sure I would have been able to do, but I learned a lot by watching. And so it's setting up the conversation so that it continue. The third thing I would say about cohort-based learning, and this is something that maybe NovoEd might feel differently about, is that the instructor should probably stay quiet. A cohort-based learning is not a bunch of people each asking the instructor questions in a group. Cohort-based learning is where people are actually asking each other questions and they're learning through their conversations with each other, and the instructor might be sitting on the side jumping in to facilitate or assist the group without necessarily being the single point of contact. So anyway, those are a couple things that we've learned. It's a very, very powerful model.
And Josh, that's exactly aligned with the NovoEd philosophy. It is not about instructors. Facilitators, coaches, and peers can all be part of the learning experience. But exactly as you described, it's about facilitating conversation. It's about spurring it on at the right moment, but mostly allowing the cohort to help learn from each other. In addition, the platform's designed to accomplish both goals: the scalability you might need to transform and build capabilities for 1,000 learners, but to simultaneously be treating that learning experience not as a cohort of 1,000, but really as teams of 10, 5, whatever the right number is within that larger group. I think we really don't have time at this point for any more questions. So, and we're sorry we didn't get to all of them. If you can email them in or write them in, we'll forward them to Josh. They might be addressed in an upcoming blog. And don't forget, everyone, we will be sending out the recording. So rest assured you'll be able to review this material. Thanks again, Josh. It was really phenomenal hosting you today. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, everybody.